been cancelled began after Hideo Kojima's future economic came into question.
He would not be allowed to travel to tonight's awards ceremony to accept any awards.
Metal Gear Survive is a chore. It's not only a slap in the face to Kojima, but a failure on its own terms. This shit is worse than Mass Effect Andromeda.
What was it all for?
There is not a single thing I can say to you that will adequately quantify just how excited I was for Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. I was hyped for this game in a way that you can't understand if you weren't also in the same situation. This was a hype beyond words. When I started making YouTube videos 7,000 years ago, I was hoping to make a lot of videos about Metal Gear because I loved it that much. That didn't happen, of course, but that should tell you something about just how much this series meant to me. Real quick, let me take you through my experience as a Metal Gear fan. My first exposure to the Metal Gear universe was in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, where Solid Snake was a playable character. He was insanely broken, not that I really knew anything about the metagame, but he was definitely my favorite character to play as, bar none. But it wasn't until 2012 that I first played Metal Gear Solid 3 as a free demo for the Nintendo 3DS, and even though it ran at 6 frames per second and only covered the Virtuous Mission, I could tell that I liked the game, so I picked up the PS2 version secondhand and I punched through it in a week. I had never played a Metal Gear game before that one, and it sold me instantly. It was so good that I already knew I loved the other games before I even played them, so pretty much the first thing I did after beating it was go and play through MGS1, then MGS2, then I bought a PS3 just to play 4, then I bought HD Collection so I could play Peace Walker, and I definitely also played Portable Ops and the MSX games at some point. Don't say I didn't. 2014 rolls around and they drop a game called Ground Zeroes, which is the precursor to Phantom Pain. I stayed up until midnight on March 18th to download that game on the PlayStation Store and play it for 20 minutes before going to bed because it was Tuesday and I had school in the morning. And there was a history assignment that I was supposed to do, and I just didn't do it because you learn more history playing Metal Gear than you'll ever learn in school. Let's be serious.
Cuban Missile Crisis. President Kennedy's assassination.
The Gulf War.
A civil war.
Mujahideen rebels.
The U.S. Congress chose not to ratify SALT II. Somebody decides to invade Afghanistan. Afghanistan has become the Soviet Union's Vietnam. Lebanon, the Falklands, Grenada, Iran, Iraq. The story never changes.
Rhodesia. What's now known as Zimbabwe?
When I finally got back to it a few days later, I was left with this ridiculous cliffhanger ending teasing Phantom Pain. Don't you ever complain about the wait time for a video game release if you weren't a Metal Gear fan between the release of Ground Zeroes and the release of Phantom Pain. Even if the only game you've been looking forward to is GTA 6, at least GTA Online has been supported and updated that whole time, and none of GTA 5's endings are cliffhangers. For almost 18 straight months, I am playing and replaying Ground Zeroes, trying to find all the XOF patches and getting used to Kiefer Sutherland's voice.
Kept you waiting, huh?
And going over that fan servicey nostalgia bait deja vu bonus mission over and over and over again, which of course ends with a quiz about MGS1, which I got every single answer correct every single time because I'm just that good. Oh yeah, that thing. I just gotta say, this mission is really funny because Kiefer Sutherland almost definitely had never played the other Metal Gear games in his life, so he just has to pretend he understands all the references to stay in character.
Snake, this is Kazuhira Miller. It's been a long time.
Master, what are you doing here?
Those mice are Alaskan field mice. No. No, they're not.
Master, are you feeling okay?
Pretty much every day between Ground Zeroes and Phantom Pain, I'm googling news about the game and looking at all these insane speculative fan theories about where it's all going, like how Quiet is actually Chico, who got a sex change operation and wanted to kill Big Boss for his lies and deceit. I didn't make that up, that was an actual theory people had. Phantom Pain was a game that was going to be so incredible in every single solitary respect that no game could possibly top it. I was hyped for this game in a way that I don't think I've ever been hyped for a game since. The closest thing was maybe when Banjo came to Smash, but you know, he was a mid-tier, so who gives a shit. A huge part of that was the trailers. This game had some of the most hype trailers I had ever seen for a video game before or since. And I still get ice-cold chills whenever I rewatch them. And this song, this goddamn song.
The sun's never die. Can't wash the blood off her hands. Let the world fill us all. It's just means to an end. Our salvation lies beyond the truth. Let me survive now. In my heart, I just know that there's no way to light up the door in his eyes.
I did it! Revenge!
The gameplay in the trailers looked cool as shit, but of course trailers always look cool as shit, right? They were showing off this dynamic CQC system, whatever the hell that meant. There was a new Metal Gear Online mode, and most importantly, it was open world, which seemed like a weird fit at the time. This was before Breath of the Wild, so open world mostly meant, you know, climbing radio towers and following yellow lines and whatnot. There was more than enough reason for people to be skeptical, and naturally, so was I. Ground Zeroes, however, gave us a small taste of what it would be like. It's worth noting that Ground Zeroes in the context of its release was almost like promotional material. It's a much smaller scale game than Phantom Pain, and it cost around $20 to $40 depending on whether you were buying last gen digital or current gen physical, which was seen by many as a cash grab for what it ultimately was. But you know, at least it's an actual game, Nintendo. Despite this, stealth game gurus praised the game heavily on its release, and people are still playing it today. Camp Omega is wide as a puddle but deep as an ocean. It's not a huge map, but it is a deep playground. This little game showed a number of departures from the sensibilities of the Metal Gear games up to this point, most notably the structure. Peace Walker before it already had the individual mission selection layout instead of having one long campaign, but those missions were still very linear in nature most of the time. The missions in Ground Zeroes were far from linear. You could do things in whatever order seems the most tactically viable. One mission could play out in many different ways, and it was a lot of fun to try new things, combining plans and execution and improv to develop an optimal playstyle. Mechanically, they added in some new features like reflex mode, where if you're detected, time grinds to a fraction of the speed and you can line up what in real time would be an extremely clutch headshot to incapacitate the guy who caught you. You also now have a sprint button, and they brought back the snake roll from MGS4. You no longer have a health bar, instead you die if you're attacked too many times in quick succession, and you get your health back by laying low like in Call of Duty. But what was most interesting about Ground Zeroes in the Phantom Pain trailers was the story. Ground Zeroes ended on a cliffhanger where Paz exploded and put Big Boss into a coma. And the trailers for Phantom Pain showed off a lot of shocking, brutal imagery of Quiet being tortured, prisoners being executed, child soldiers being trained for war, and one scene where Big Boss guns down a bunch of kids harvesting blood diamonds. Coming off of Peace Walker, we had already seen the beginning of the end for Big Boss. During that game, he is forced to fight an AI construct of the boss, meaning he has to relive the trauma that set him on his current path in the first place, an event that drives him completely off the deep end.
Why? I don't understand. Answer me. Tell me why. Answer me.
And after the credits, he delivers this speech where he sounds like a maniacal cult leader rousing up his followers for a divine mission.
We will forsake our countries. We will leave our motherlands behind us and become one with this earth. We may all be headed straight to hell. But what better place for us than this? It is our only home, our heaven and our hell. This is utter heaven.
Now, after 2008, we know what ultimately becomes of Big Boss and Solid Snake in the end. MGS4 was a scorched earth operation to tie up every single solitary loose end so that not a single Metal Gear fan could reasonably ask any more questions. Even though most of the questions that it answered weren't ever really supposed to be answered in the first place, but that's another story. After MGS4, anything that wasn't a new era spin-off game like Rising is mostly elaborate post-hoc backfill that doesn't really change anything, but is still emotionally interesting to play through as an invested fan. What you have to understand is that the Big Boss Saga is the inverse of the Solid Snake Saga. The story of Solid Snake is the story of a genetically perfected mindless killer learning to become human and fighting for something greater than himself.
It's not about winning or losing. We started this, and it's our duty to finish it.
While the Big Boss Saga is the story of a human who once believed in something rapidly degenerating into a mindless killing machine who fights only for himself as a reaction to what he perceives as a monstrous betrayal at the hands of the system.
Why would anyone want to defect? Betraying your country like that, I just don't get it.
We will forsake our countries. We will leave our motherlands behind us and become one with this earth.
Phantom Pain appeared to be the next step in Big Boss's bespoke and biblical downfall, and what I and so many others were anticipating was an absolutely gut-wrenching chapter that would chew us up and shit us out. Something that would make you really hate Big Boss as he becomes the monster that haunts the rest of the series. Suffice it to say, anticipation for this game was unbearable. That's when the red flags started to show up. Rumors of internal strife between Kojima and Konami began to emerge, whispers of hostile work environments, and Kojima's future at the company was slowly being called into question. Then, the collaboration between Kojima, Norman Reedus, and Guillermo del Toro, Silent Hills, this extremely ambitious and mysterious horror game that got a demo that had the entire internet in a collective chokehold. Konami says, "Yeah, we're not making that anymore."
Father purchased the rifle used in the crime at his local gun store 2 days earlier. This brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon. Don't touch that dial now, we're just getting started.
Shortly before Phantom Pain is set to come out, they make the strange move of deleting a Hideo Kojima game from the game's box, which, you know, of course nobody would mistake this for a not Kojima production, but aside from being a disrespectful move given how much he's given to this series and the company,
To say he's a critical VIP would be a massive understatement.
it was also cause for concern. It was an unmistakable symptom of something being very, very wrong. And sure enough, once the game released and sold over 6 million copies, he is removed from the company and contractually prevented from attending the Game Awards ceremony.
There's Kojima, look! Did you know that Jeff Keighley's friends with him?
Yeah, but does Kojima know that?
I know people make fun of the Game Awards a lot, but it was really nice to see Jeff give Kojima the award the following year.
He is one of the most principled, loyal, and ethical men I have ever met. And I'm just so honored to call you a friend above everything else, Hideo. And like Snake said in MGS, Hideo knows that a strong man doesn't need to read his future, he makes his own. You've always been there for me, and you have never disappointed me.
Alright, Jeff, you're laying it on a little thick, alright?
I love you, Jeff.
Oh. You know what, I'll just leave you two alone. Today, stories about the general rottenness of the video game industry are a dime a dozen. You know, it's like they're in a competition to see who can be the biggest piece of shit, but this was one of the first big cracks in the dam that I can remember hearing about. I mean, before that, you saw the beginning of scummy practices like removing content and selling it as DLC for extra money and season passes, which, you know, that stuff is so regular now that we don't even notice it anymore. But in 2015, seeing how upper management of this renowned, decades-old video game developer treated one of their most valuable creative forces, it was definitely what they call a black pill moment. Konami fumbled around with nonsense for almost a decade after kicking Kojima to the curb, and where did that lead them? Right back to Silent Hill and Metal Gear. Did we learn our lesson, Konami? Still, all of this is to say that beyond whatever would become of the game itself, there were a lot of emotions going into it as a longtime Metal Gear fan. There was a very good chance that this game would be the last time we ever saw the world of Metal Gear, not just because of Kojima's departure, but because of Konami's very clear intentions of shifting their focus away from games like Metal Gear. The idea that even something like a remastered collection of the older titles could exist a decade later was not a foregone conclusion. We had no idea. Metal Gear Solid 5 had a tremendously cursed and toxic energy surrounding it before release, and the phantoms of all of those emotions can still be felt to this day, to the point that they sometimes overshadow the game itself. There was tremendous pressure on Phantom Pain. Whatever this game ended up being, it had to be, more than any game that came before it, not just a good game. It had to be an undeniably perfect send-off to a long-running story. This had to be Metal Gear's Mother 3. This had to be a satisfying conclusion. Despite everything, despite the cancellation of Silent Hills, despite the deterioration of Kojima's goodwill at Konami, Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain released on September 1st, 2015, to virtually unanimous acclaim. I bought and started this game on launch day and played it for over 200 hours on PlayStation 4, finally obtaining the Platinum Trophy at 3 AM on Christmas morning. I tell you about the Platinum Trophy not to brag, but to demonstrate to you that I gave this game all that I had, and played it for all that it was worth. And when I was done, I could not describe how I felt. That was it. That was Metal Gear. It's done. And that was pretty much how my experience as a Metal Gear fan ended, at least for a while.
Our time has ended. Our war is over.
It took several years before I could get back into it. I couldn't bear to get emotionally reinvested in this series. My feelings at the time were not that much different from the critical reception at the time, head over heels for the gameplay and not so much for the story. So let's talk about the gameplay for a little bit.
How about you, Snake? Boss, have you lost your mind?
I cannot stress this enough. This is still one of the greatest action games I have ever played. Everything about it is virtually surgical. The number of options you have and the remarkable intuitiveness of it despite this is still so impressive. In terms of creativity in an open world setting, the only game I can think of that could match it since then was Breath of the Wild, but even that game struggled with reward systems. Metal Gear encourages the player to think creatively with bonus mission objectives and the ranking system that is completely broken because you can kill 7 people and get caught 100,000 times, but as long as you beat it quickly enough, the game will give you an S rank. If you played Ground Zeroes, you know the basic mechanics of Phantom Pain, but this game is far, far bigger. The open worlds are far more vast and wide than Camp Omega, and you can customize your weapon loadout to a huge extent, even going as far as spawning in with a set of wheels. It brought back the Fulton recovery system from Peace Walker, where you can tie soldiers and POWs to helium balloons that pull them into the sky, where they are brought on board a chopper and convinced to leave behind their entire lives to become personal employees of your own private army. The Fulton recovery system exists in real life, although this is not at all how it actually works, but if it were realistic, the game would be a lot harder and more tedious, so just roll with it. Phantom Pain is an extremely modular experience in stark contrast to how missions in open world games usually work, where you're often getting into a very specific car and following a yellow line and then getting into a shootout and killing 300 people. For the first little bit, it's easy to settle into narrowly defined strategies that work most of the time, but the game eventually starts throwing curveballs with heavily armored enemies that can't just be killed with riot pellets. You know, killed non-lethally. And then you have evil fucker tanks that one-shot you from across the map. I have a distinct memory of playing this game back in 2015 and getting really fed up with this mission where the Mist Skulls one-shot you with sniper fire that you can't really dodge, so I said, okay, what if I just spawn in with a late game armored vehicle and drive through the sniper fire, literally tanking the hits while suffering no damage to my person whatsoever? And sure enough, it totally worked, like a charm. Between all the 700,000 different types of guns and grenades and decoys and the surprising ways in which all the different systems interact with each other, it is a very open-ended game that few other open-world titles have managed or even really tried to rival since. When I learned that you could actually defeat Quiet by doing a supply drop on her head, which is entirely non-lethal, that's when I knew I might be playing the greatest video game ever made. And aside from all that, there's just a level of fluidity and snappiness to the entire game that none of the other games in the series can really match. Even beyond Metal Gear, I can think of like 3 games that feel as good to control as this one, and one of them is Super Mario 64, so goddamn. In many ways, it even feels better to play than the Snake Eater remake that came out last Thursday. Like I said earlier, the game will run you somewhere in the ballpark of 200 hours if you go for 100% like I did, getting the S rank on every single mission, finding all the blueprints or whatever, and completing all the bonus mission objectives. Not all of the objectives are made equal though. There are some real shit-ass ones where you have to stalk NPCs around the map and listen to their never-ending conversations about the politics of their work. And if you're detected or disrupt their cycle in any way, you can break their script and you have to restart the mission. But thankfully, when you get to the late game, you can do these missions using stealth camo. It also bears noting that in the back half of the game, there are recycled missions from earlier with special conditions like perfect stealth or subsistence, where you can't have any backup or weapons. These appear to be very obvious filler, but at the same time, they force you to get creative in a way that maybe you didn't have to before. TLDR, I thought it was fun. A lot of other people thought so too back then.
Stay high to shadow Jesus for me, you son of a bitch. Woo! Bam! Yeah! Hell yeah!
He also sucks at everything. You know what? People like this are only good for one thing.
Don't look at the fuck! win, dog!
Even today, I still get videos in my feed titled, "This is how you're actually supposed to play MGS5," or "This is what 3,000 hours of MGS5 looks like," and they'll do shit that I didn't even know you could do, and I'd be like, what? So, here's my contribution to that. Whoa, 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 whoa. Good night. Oh, there's another. Okay, good night. Whoa. Oh, you put your hands where I can see them. Good night. Why are you getting up? Get back down. I didn't tell you to get up. I didn't tell you to get up. Nighty night. What? He saw me through the wall. Okay, we're taking out the garbage today. That's 1. That's 2. 3. 5. 10. And 1 more. Okay. Wakey, wakey, bitches. So yeah, that's how you're actually supposed to play it. In addition to incredible open world gameplay, there is also a lot of micromanagement with all your resources and staff. As I mentioned earlier, you build up your army by knocking out soldiers and convincing them to join you, and as part of Diamond Dogs, they can be deployed on missions elsewhere, and also help you develop weapons and items. The number of weapons and tools at your disposal is absolutely absurd, especially when Konami started adding in a bunch of really broken ones that take literal real-life days to develop, because they're hoping you'll just get fed up with it and buy Mother Base coins for actual money to develop them faster, which honestly fuck them for that, and also fuck them for trying to sell FOB insurance to keep players from nuking your base, but whatever. Probably the biggest improvement over Peace Walker's Mother Base system is that weapons and expansions are developed in real time, instead of forcing you to just repeatedly play some mission to artificially lapse time. So you can set something to develop, leave the game on when you go to make dinner or go to bed or whatever, and when you come back everything's developed and waiting for you. For a game this long, the general pacing is counterintuitively a lot more efficient than the other titles, with hours of cassette tape recordings of conversations between the characters which can be listened to while you're playing instead of interrupting the gameplay with codec conversations like they used to. Also, this doesn't matter at all, but you can actually load your own MP3 files into the game and set them as your helicopter music, which means you can do this. The presentation is also very good. The music in Metal Gear has always been top-notch and often elevated the gameplay to the cinematic prestige of the movies that make up Kojima's body. And this game is certainly no exception. And visually, it's still very nice to look at a lot of the time. You can see the imperfections today, not every 3D model is super rounded, but the sheer vastness of the environments is what makes it so impressive. The Fox engine is an incredible piece of work, not only because of how games look, but also because of how well optimized it is. You gotta remember, they put this game in its entirety on the PlayStation 3. I mean, it's not ideal to play it on that machine, but the fact that the entire game is playable at all is incredible.
Thanks, Fox engine.
Then there's the cutscenes. Now, Kojima loves cutscenes, and even though this game has a much higher gameplay cutscene ratio than the previous titles, the cutscenes that are there look incredible to this day. One of my favorite stylistic choices is that most of the cutscenes are shot in one continuous take, which creates this uneasy effect of making you feel like a first-hand witness to the disturbing events of the game, as opposed to somebody watching a highly edited and curated video sequence. Or as though it's being shot by a wartime journalist who was literally on the ground right there.
I've covered wars, you know.
It also allows gameplay and cutscene to flow into each other in a very naturalistic way.
Get the fuck out of there!
So the gameplay and the presentation are absolutely top-notch, but most of the criticisms towards this game are directed at the story. Now, like with a lot of Kojima's games, the best parts of the story are the areas where the themes and messages resonate within the specific gameplay systems. Ludonarrative resonance, if you will, as opposed to dissonance. Phantom Pain has possibly my favorite examples of this. As the player, you are always hiring and firing soldiers, sending them potentially to their deaths from your iDroid, where you can only ever really see them as numbers and statistics. You create your own stupid little insignias that you put on your tanks and your choppers. Whether you realize it or not, you are essentially laying down the groundwork for the PMC epidemic that ends up being the plot of MGS4. Everybody can develop their own nuclear weapons, which they can then drop on another online player's FOB, which might sound really funny until you realize that if you can nuke other players, the other players can nuke your base too. This is terrifying, so how do you prevent other players from nuking your base, aside from paying Konami money? Well, you do it the same way real-life countries prevented themselves from getting nuked, by developing a stockpile of your own nuclear weapons to assure the mutual destruction of an attacking nation. Yeah, that's how you keep the other players from nuking you. However, the game will play a secret cutscene once the online servers detect that every single solitary player in the world has dismantled all of their nuclear warheads.
Only when our children show the wisdom not to forge new spears. Only then will we be truly triumphant.
This cutscene has only ever played once, and according to Konami, it was due to a glitch and not because everyone actually managed to disable their weapons. That's fucking bleak. The only piece we ever knew was a complete lie. This is the kind of stuff that Kojima fans love about Kojima. The way he ties the themes of the game into the actual gameplay is just full of the exaggerated swagger of a Japanese man in his 60s. It gives me goosebumps every time he does it. Judging by how this cutscene actually goes, I think Kojima knew that the players would almost certainly never organically achieve total nuclear disarmament, because it almost feels, in its context, like a secret ending to the game where the characters become noble heroes fighting for peace, which is virtually the complete opposite of how they're contextualized in the rest of the story, to the extent that it risks breaking the already precarious lore. It almost serves the purpose of being the good ending to the game that you get for doing all the right stuff, as opposed to the regular bad ending that everyone actually got. Like, this is the ending that is so unrealistically optimistic that it just cannot be canon. And I think that's a good segue into talking about the actual plot of the game as it was presented, because that's where most of the criticism of the game is directed. Now, the plot itself is, to say the least, not really what we were expecting, and even though I've come to like it a lot more in recent years, especially as some very smart people have made it make a little more sense, playing the game for the first time in 2015 was agonizing. The other games had a lot of serious shit, but there was a lot of silliness to it that balanced it out, and that was the element that was most missing from the story and the writing of MGS5 for me. Back then, I assumed it was a mistake, like Kojima fucked up and decided to make a bad story for fun, but no. Now what you have to understand is that Phantom Pain is Moby Dick with Metal Gear characters, but just in case you didn't pick up on that, Kojima made sure to remind everybody in Death Stranding 2, where Sam Bridges pulls out a copy of the book and starts reading it. Real quick, here's a recap of Phantom Pain's plot. After the events of Ground Zeroes, Big Boss is in a comatose state and wakes up after 9 years having taken a bunch of shrapnel. You are prompted to create a custom character, with the context being that you need to disguise yourself, but on the other end of the sequence you still have Big Boss's face, and your name is now Ahab, like the guy from Moby Dick, if you've ever read that.
Captain Ahab, one of the main characters, uses a prosthetic leg made of whalebone to replace the one Moby Dick took long ago.
Put a pin in that. The doctor then shows you these photographs to remind you who you are before being killed by this lady who tries to kill you, but then a mystery man with a bandaged face saves your ass, and in a voice that sounds exactly like yours, put a pin in that, he says,
"Call me Ishmael,"
which is the opening line of Moby Dick.
His crew's only survivor is Ishmael, the book's narrator.
You then escape from the hospital while fighting off Psycho Baby Mantis and a man on fire who looks a lot like Colonel Volgin from MGS3, except you blew him up 20 years ago, so that's impossible. Put a pin in that. Then you lose track of Ishmael and meet up with Revolver Ocelot, who brings you to a whaling ship, kinda like that book Moby Dick if you've ever read that. He brings you to Afghanistan to rescue Kaz, who started Diamond Dogs, which is MSF 2.0. You save him from the skulls and put him on a chopper called the Pequod, which is the name of the whaling ship from Moby Dick if you've ever read that.
The Pequod is the ship in which Ahab pursues Moby Dick on his quest for vengeance.
Miller vows revenge on Cypher and Skullface for taking everything from him, kinda like Captain Ahab vows revenge on Moby Dick for losing his leg. Snake is like, hell yeah, brother, I'll do all the work. You do a bunch of missions aiding the local Mujahideen against occupying Soviet forces in pursuit of Skullface. You recruit a naked sniper lady named Quiet who doesn't talk, even though she tried to kill you in the beginning and a second time during this boss fight, but you beat her non-lethally by dropping a box of Mountain Dew on her head.
There's nothing damn fine about this thing.
They're called women, Kaz. Then you kidnap Huey and fight off an unfinished Sahelanthropus and interrogate him on suspicion of working as a double agent for Cypher and knowingly allowing the attack on Mother Base in Ground Zeroes. That's when you go to Africa to chase down more leads on Cypher, which is where you find these kids in a jail cell who you are ordered to kill, and you, having watched all the trailers and teasers, you recognize this scene immediately, and... So, no, Big Boss does not shoot a bunch of defenseless kids in this scene. He shoots a bucket while recording with his Walkman to make it seem like he did. Then he brings the kids back to Mother Base so they can learn algebra or something. This is tens of hours into the game, so by this point you might have forgotten about the weird shit in the intro, but at this moment, you are reminded that something isn't right. You are reminded that there may be some kind of major trickery going on. Put a pin in it. Eventually, your own soldiers start getting sick, and when browsing the affected soldiers, you notice the only common denominator is that they all speak Kikongo, so you send every Kikongo speaker to the quarantine platform until you can figure out what's going on. That's when you find Eli, who is suspected to be one of the children from the Les Enfants Terribles project. Ocelot, be careful, you're gonna need that arm later. But it turns out he's not a subject of the Les Enfants Terribles project because a DNA test using his and yours comes up negative, but wait, he's a clone of Big Boss. That was made very, very, very clear 100,000 times in the rest of the series, so this is impossible, right? Put a really big pin in that. Then you gain some intel on Code Talker, who is an expert on vocal cord parasites who was forced by Skullface to manufacture different strains for different languages. This is what's making your soldiers sick, so you bring him back to Mother Base to reverse the course of the epidemic. Snake confronts Skullface, who reveals he wants to destroy the English language while using Sahelanthropus to maintain nuclear deterrence for all nations and cultures outside of those that speak English. But then Psycho Baby Mantis, who it turns out was using psychokinesis to control Sahelanthropus the entire time, betrays Skullface in favor of Eli. So you blow it up and then find Skullface trapped under some rubble. Kaz shows up and you both kill him together by shooting him in the head 50 times. But one of the 3 English strains of the vocal cord parasite he was carrying around is missing. Put a big pin in that too. Kaz does a big speech as everybody walks in super cinematic slow motion. They bring back the broken Sahelanthropus as a war trophy, and then the credits roll. On paper, this right here is a satisfying note to end on. You killed the big bad guy, you blew up the giant scary robot, you saved the world from total annihilation. In any other Metal Gear game, it would have been, in many ways, the satisfying conclusion that you worked so hard for. And it's the end of Chapter 1. Start Chapter 2. Skullface is dead. Sahelanthropus is disabled. What now? Well, Snake does a couple more missions, including some recycled missions from earlier with new conditions. Then he confronts the man on fire, and what do you know, it really was Volgin. He was kept alive purely by a vengeful grudge against Big Boss for his defeat in Snake Eater. But then when he actually sees your face, he appears shocked and surprised, and then he just drops dead. Put a pin in it. That's when Paz shows up. You remember her, right? The girl who exploded right in front of your eyes in Ground Zeroes? Yeah, she actually survived that and has an elaborate psychological complex that makes her think it's still 1974 and won't respond to anything that conflicts with her internal timeline. Then you show her a bunch of old photos from MSF and then her brain short circuits and she pulls a bomb out of her stomach, the same one she had in Ground Zeroes, and then she blows up again and you realize the entire thing was actually you having an elaborate hallucination. Alright, some of the shrapnel in your brain can trigger hallucinations, as mentioned in one of the cassette tapes, and this might not even be the first one. God damn it. Then suddenly Eli and the child soldiers you extracted earlier cause an uprising where they actually steal Salanthropus from Mother Base and then jump into the ocean, kinda like the end of MGS2. Fast forward a little bit, you learn of a huge vocal cord parasite outbreak back at Mother Base because Eli and Psycho Baby Mantis had the third English strain the entire time. So you go back there and discover that basically the entire quarantine platform is infected. So you have to kill everyone in the building one by one to stop the infection from spreading.
Individuals to leaves. Shoot, Snake! That's it. That's good.
Snake! You expect me to just stand by and watch this?
Are here to kill us!
You're insane, Snake! You're one of your men! You yourself said we're a family! Or was it all lies? Shooting your own men. That's not the big boss I knew.
Hang on, boss. Is he wearing a mask? He might not be infected. Carry the rescue team member to the exit. He's the only one not infected.
Has been updated.
I don't think I made it after all.
What? You just checked him. Could it have progressed this quickly? Boss, take another look at him with the goggles. He is infected. I don't believe it.
Maybe got him through my wounds. They're waiting now. All of them. Do it.
I'm sorry, boss.
After this soul-crushing sequence, Huey is exiled from Diamond Dogs on suspicion that he modified the vocal cord parasite and possibly murdered his wife because she tried to stop him from letting his son pilot the Salanthropus.
It's just like one of my Japanese animes!
More recycled missions, and then Quiet disappears from the base, so you go to Afghanistan and fight off 7 armored vehicles, 7 tanks, and 1 chopper for good measure. And a lot of these will one-shot you from across the map because the mission is very well designed. I'm pretty sure that happened in Moby Dick. Venom Snake is bitten by a venom snake and in a semi-inebriated state finds a cassette tape left behind by Quiet. Turns out the real reason Quiet doesn't speak is because she was carrying vocal cord parasites and she was sent there to destroy you, but had a conflict of conscience halfway through, and ostensibly joined Diamond Dogs. Because she can no longer predict how the parasites she's carrying will react, however, she walks off into the desert never to be seen again. And then this happens.
How's he doing?
Well, he stabilized, but it took too long. He's in a coma.
What about him?
He, took some shrapnel. To the head.
The payoff to all of this insane, weird shit, facing Big Boss's old nemesis and hallucinating dead characters from Peace Walker, is that you were never playing as Big Boss at all. You were playing as the combat medic who was in the helicopter with Big Boss at the end of Ground Zeroes. The medic jumped in the way of some shrapnel to save Big Boss's life, and while in a coma next to Big Boss, Zero enacted a plan to transform him into a decoy version of Big Boss through plastic surgery and hypnotherapy, such that when he wakes up, he will fully believe that he's the real Big Boss and he will forget his entire past. He receives a tape from Big Boss with side A labeled "From the Man Who Sold the World," and flipping it to side B, the label says Operation Intrude N313, which is the name of the mission in Metal Gear 1. He places it into a cassette player hooked up to an MSX2 computer system which the original game was released on. He walks out of frame and comes back with a giant horn and a permanently bloodied face. So, when you first killed Big Boss in 1987, that wasn't actually Big Boss, that was a phantom of Big Boss. Then, in the post-credits scene, Miller becomes furious at Big Boss's betrayal while Ocelot remains loyal.
Big Boss can go to hell. I'll make the Phantom and his son stronger to send him there. For that, I'll keep playing my role.
I'm sorry guys, I really didn't think it would take that long. Taken completely at face value, this ending was confusing, emotionally unsatisfying, and indescribably infuriating. And it should come as no surprise that the critical reception was so unanimous on praising the gameplay and trashing the story. And again, finishing it for the first time after becoming such a big fan of the series and getting so invested left me with a very empty and hollow feeling that I couldn't fully process at the time.
What was it all for?
And apparently, I was not alone. Obsessed, dedicated fans possessed by the dire need for closure desperately began chasing down every possible lead they could, searching for more satisfying answers, even going as far as data mining the game to hell and back. Working tirelessly, furiously, fanatically, but as Ahab and his crew are doomed to be swallowed up by the sea, ultimately failing in their quest to stamp out the whale. Neither did the fans ever truly satisfy their lust for closure. All while Ishmael, Big Boss, survived by holding on to the coffin of the disillusioned and doomed Venom Snake. You.
I cheated death thanks to you. And thanks to you, I've left my mark.
But as much as this ending hurt though, the more I've learned to appreciate that feeling the older I got. I've always believed that video games were art, but what you have to remember is that art is not necessarily supposed to make you comfortable, and some of the best art will make you decidedly uncomfortable and even angry. When I first played it 10 years ago, I didn't really understand that. How could something be art if it doesn't satisfy my extremely specific and discrete appetites at all times? And yet, I am still thinking about it 10 years later. It's possible that I've thought more about this game than any other game in the series. Some people will say this game's whole story is pointless in the grand scheme of things, but I don't think that's true. For one thing, it explains why Kaz would aid Solid Snake later on, despite being Big Boss's ally for years. He was sickened by his own thirst for revenge against Cypher and Skullface, but turned his vengeful appetites towards Big Boss in response to his betrayal. So at least on that front, it definitely has a purpose. The last thing I expected before this game came out was that I would feel the most sorry for Kaz above everybody else. In a way, he almost seems more like Captain Ahab in the Moby Dick comparison. He's the one primarily dead set on this revenge mission, riling up the hysteria among the soldiers. And debatably, he lost more than anybody else, losing both his leg and his arm, his old comrades, and Big Boss. A man he would have fucking died for if he had to. In Peace Walker, he was confident, excitable, energetic, he was charming and handsome, he was the man, and the thirst for revenge turned him into this profoundly hideous shell of a man, virtually unrecognizable from the character we saw in Peace Walker. Playing this game right after Peace Walker makes it that much more depressing. The one hope he clung onto for the entirety of Phantom Pain was that Big Boss would always have his back, that they would continue working towards the future they were building in Peace Walker, failing to realize that Big Boss had already hung him out to dry before the game even started.
9 years ago, I thought everything had been taken from me, but now I really have lost it all. The boss, and the future we were building together.
Now, the easiest and most oversimplified interpretation of the story and the way that it's delivered is that it's supposed to leave you feeling empty and hollow, the same way the characters feel empty and hollow now that their pursuit of revenge is seemingly fulfilled, discovering that it doesn't actually make any difference other than to make you more hideous inside and out.
Doesn't feel like this is over. And I'll never be whole again.
If that sounds like cope, I'd like to remind you that when Last of Us did it, it won Game of the Year, so yeah. I will say I definitely got a lot more out of the story when I actually took the time to listen to all the cassette tapes. Whenever I was doing side ops where there wasn't any story dialogue or cutscenes or anything, I'd just put the tapes on and I'd learn a lot that I didn't know about the events of the game and the real world political strife surrounding it.
Less enfants terribles. You never did like the French.
One of the biggest themes in this game is mistrust and betrayal. Even though everyone seems unified in their mission in following Venom Snake, a culture of paranoia and fear begins to take hold of Diamond Dogs.
What if she's a spy?
What if I'm a spy?
Man, shut the fuck up, Ocelot. You have Big Boss's betrayal of his old comrades, seemingly having no problem whatsoever with leaving Kaz out of his plans after he awakens. And once you finish the game, you, as a longtime player and fan, will feel betrayed yourself. We didn't see the fall of Big Boss in a bespoke biblical way like we were expecting to, but in a sneaky, underhanded, and cowardly way, which is somehow way worse. Just like he and the boss before him were treated as completely disposable by their country, so too does he have virtually no reservations whatsoever about letting Venom Snake, the medic who was once one of his most loyal soldiers, the boss to his own United States, take the fall for all the trouble he caused, including being the target of Skullface's vengeful ambitions, and being killed by Solid Snake in Metal Gear 1 from 1987. He knows that Venom Snake, that you, will consider it an honor to follow in Big Boss's footsteps. He knows Venom Snake is not a free thinker, he is a follower, a good soldier, and he will fulfill his role with no questions asked.
This is why we chose you. You accepted the fiction we've provided, obeyed our orders, and did everything you were told to.
When you finish the story, you can't help but feel like something's missing. You can't help but feel like something is there that isn't there. An itch that you can't scratch.
Something akin to a phantom pain.
Yeah. One of the most popular narratives surrounding this game's discourse is that it's unfinished, that Kojima never got to realize his full vision. Many people close to Kojima and Kojima himself have repeatedly denied that the game is incomplete, insisting that it is in fact finished and true to his vision. Until yesterday when he tweeted this out, because of course he fucking waited until I was almost done making this video to throw me a curveball like that. Although this doesn't necessarily mean he's endorsing the opinion that it's unfinished, he has a long history of just reflexively tweeting out news articles about how cool he is, and this is ultimately just another one of those, despite the loaded title. Even before then, there were still a lot of people saying that it was unfinished, contrary to his insistence, largely on account of the bad blood between Konami, fueling conspiracy theories that Kojima is forbidden from telling the truth. Given what little we know, it's probably not hard to imagine a situation where they told him to wrap it up before it goes way over budget, and maybe put a muzzle on him such that he can't talk about that. But that's largely conjecture and conspiracy. A lot of these rumors were inspired by the remnants of episode 51, which only really exists as a single cutscene that's about 30% complete that can be viewed in certain versions of the game, but there is an argument to be made that this is just cut content, which happens with every single game. All games end up leaving a lot on the cutting room floor. Every game starts with a whole bunch of ideas, but it's obvious from the start that only a few of those ideas can succeed. If cut content means a game is unfinished, then Banjo-Kazooie is unfinished because Fungus Forest didn't make the cut, Ocarina of Time is unfinished because you never obtained the Triforce, and the majority of Metal Gear games are unfinished as well.
Kojima once said he could only get about 60% of his ideas in Metal Gear Solid, and had to abandon lots more throughout the entire series. One cut idea was a singing mariachi who advised Snake on battle tactics. He'd give you information about a particular mercenary, but only after he sang a song, and you'd have to sit through the entire song before he'd give the information. He didn't make it into the game.
But most importantly, this video is unfinished because I originally tried to animate Kojima and Jeff Keighley getting married on a beach, but it didn't go so well, so I had to cut it from the video. Still, all of this combined with the way digital information works in general created a perfect storm of misinterpretations and half-truths, a cocktail of trivial junk data reinterpreted through rigid value systems and perpetuated and curated echo chambers, where dissenting opinions were blocked from participation, forcing them to create their own. And if only there was a video game that could have predicted. As a result, it's still not at all an uncommon opinion that Kojima's vision was compromised and that he didn't really make the game he wanted to, despite him insisting otherwise, and that Phantom Pain is in fact an unfinished video game. For years, I was fully on board with the idea that the game was unfinished because it was more comforting to believe a clean narrative of Konami screwing over a sensitive artiste rather than the possibility that that sensitive artiste was deliberately playing me like a fiddle. But lately, I've been more open to the possibility that this is the story they wanted to tell, and that there is a very intentional message or potent emotional truth hiding in this weird phantom game. In Chapter 2, you are just fighting phantoms, killing your own soldiers to save the world from a disease left behind by the antagonist that you've already violently gunned down, replaying older missions with new conditions, hallucinating the revival of a character and seeing a traumatic, vivid fabrication of the memory of her death that after 9 comatose years has gone through several different filters, fighting Volgan again, fighting a horde of 7 tanks, 7 armored vehicles, 300 soldiers, and a deadly gunship in a mission that is so brutal and unfair that you have to wonder if it was properly playtested, and finally replaying the exact same mission as the intro with a few changes, revealing the entire game is a convenient lie. It's so unreal, even within its own context. A lot of this chapter is practically a fugue state, a blur. Despite being surrounded by comrades and having a support team at your back the entire time, the game makes you feel more alone than ever, as it becomes clear that you can't even necessarily trust the version of events shown to you as memories begin to blur and corrupt and recontextualize themselves.
Manipulating memories, the past, in a world, it's doublethink. In this year, 2 + 2 = 5.
Cobbled together by the false memories implanted from Big Boss's recollection through hypnotherapy. And instead of the satisfying conclusion that we wanted, it's just empty, mindless fighting against phantoms of an enemy that doesn't exist anymore. An unsatisfying lead-in to the very first game in the series where this character meets their bitter end. There are a lot of different theories and interpretations and synergies of different theories and interpretations about Phantom Pain, and new ones are being spawned to this day. But the ones that I find the most compelling are the ones that suggest that this is really the old MGS2 trick again. You have to remember that this idea that MGS2 is a masterpiece was absolutely foreign until relatively recently. How could it possibly be a masterpiece when you play as a gay boy who doesn't smoke instead of kicking ass as Snake while laughing it up with Otacon, just like in my Japanese animes? Through a combination of the game's eerily accurate predictions about the dynamics of social media and digital information in the 21st century, and crazy academic big brain people putting the themes of the game into words that the rest of us stupid orcses can understand, MGS2 slowly but surely became one of the greatest video game stories ever written, and I think there's something beautiful about that. This idea that the narrative somehow becomes more profound with time. I think that's something very special. This kind of stuff is difficult to see when you're just a guy who wants to play a silly video game. But as I got older, the world became more and more strange. Things started to make less and less sense. These weird stories about what's real, the forces at play, how does the world really work, and whose interests are really being served. I began to appreciate them a lot more.
The sharing of biased and
False news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these things simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
The video game medium is an unexpectedly brilliant vehicle for examining these questions, as you are an active participant rather than an observer. Kojima understood this years ago, and that is why Jeff Keighley wants to marry him. The theories usually go a little bit something like this. Ground Zeroes is to Phantom Pain what the Tanker chapter of MGS2 is to the Plant chapter of MGS2. They both start out with you playing as the real badass action hero, and then in the actual game, you play as some other guy that you don't know or really care about whatsoever. You go on a long mission under completely false pretenses in service of forces that you weren't even aware of, that expect you to fulfill your role with no questions asked. But unlike the end of MGS2, where Raiden discards the name tag with your name on it into the dirty streets of New York City, Phantom Pain is like, actually, you are Big Boss, dude. Your purpose in life is to be Big Boss. Congratulations, you scum bastard. Raiden is initially contextualized as a guy who played a bunch of VR missions, essentially a guy who was training to fill the role of Solid Snake by playing a bunch of MGS1 like you did. When Snake asks him about his training, he says,
Sneaking mission 60, weapons 80, advanced
VR, huh?
But realistic in every way.
Debatable. Likewise, Venom Snake, you have been preparing to be Big Boss for years because you are such a big fan of Metal Gear that you own Metal Gear on an original MSX2 home computer even though they cost $500 on eBay and would most assuredly get broken in the process of shipping from Japan. In a way, the ending can be thought of as almost like a litmus test to see if you really understood or internalized MGS2. Speaking of tests, remember when I said earlier that the disarmament cutscene was like the secret good ending? Well, what's interesting about that secret good ending is the dialogue. Some of the things that Kaz says sound very familiar to the things that Snake says to Raiden during the ending of MGS2.
Our duty is to pass on what we've learned to the next generation. The memories, the experiences, the sins.
We need to pass the torch and let our children read our messy and sad history by its light.
This is the message that maybe we would have come to understand if we all managed to dismantle our nuclear warheads, if we gained the courage not to forge new spears. Kojima said on Twitter that this was a social experiment, but I wonder, did the experiment have the results that he expected? The results that he had hoped to see? I don't know. There is a lot about this game that I don't know, and I spent so much time looking for answers, but at the end of the day, I was just going in circles like the recycled missions. I spent so much time cursing Konami for interfering with Kojima's vision in ways that might not have even actually happened like I imagined them to. And even if it did, what would it matter? What could I do? All these years, I convinced myself that I was rebellious against the corruption and the degradation of the video game industry, while still playing right into their hands. Perhaps I was Ahab, at war with nature, a force completely indifferent to my frustration. that long preceded me and will outlive me far into the future as the great shroud of the sea rolls on just as it did back in 2015. My hatred of this company would never replace the pain of experiencing this bizarre and frustrating send-off to one of my favorite video game series of all time. And after all these years, I don't even know if I was directing it at the right target, or if there even was a target in the first place. I may well have been fighting phantoms the entire time.
9 years ago, I thought everything had been taken from me.
But I didn't lose anything. Thanks to all of you.
Wait a minute. If Ishmael is Big Boss, why does he have both of his eyes?